Morning, everyone. Morning again, and good evening, guys. Welcome to this webinar of Back to Future Hybrid Workplace Trends for the Next Decade. I'm Deepesh, and I'm the CEO and co-founder of Move and Sync. Work and Sync is a hybrid workplace solution. Uh, it helps enterprises, small and large, to move to a flexi or a hybrid workplace. We've been in business for close to a decade, and we've got presence in a couple of geographies, which includes India, US, Canada, and countries in Europe. But with that, I'm very excited to welcome Kate. Kate Lister is the president of Global Workplace Analytics, a research and consulting firm that has been helping organizations optimize flexible and distributed work for nearly 2 decades. Probably before the word hybrid or remote actually became common, and she would kind of talk us a little about that. She's a trusted source of insights about the future of work for news outlets such as New York Times, Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, and Newsweek, to name a few. As a recognized thought leader, Kate was one of the only three witnesses invited to testify before the US Senate committee regarding the potential of remote work in the government once the pandemic ends. So welcome, Kate. I personally and our attendees globally are very excited to hear your deep research and analytical work on this topic.
Well, it's great to be here. I never get tired of talking about it. And I've been doing a lot of that, particularly in the last 2 years. I mean, it's a shame that it took a pandemic to demonstrate to the world what advocates have been saying for decades, what research has proven for decades, that remote, hybrid, telework, telecommuting, whatever you want to call it, has great benefits for employers, for employees, for the environment, and for society. And we're sort of living through that right now.
No, very interesting. And I think while we were having an earlier conversation, the one thing which I think I wanted our audience to know about is about this origin of especially what now has become a remote or a hybrid work. Why don't you just share us about the origin of this work
Uh,
from a couple of decades back? I thought it was very
yeah. Well, no,
interesting.
it actually goes back 5 decades. 1973. Jack Nillis was a rocket scientist, and somebody stopped him at the water cooler and said, "Well, Jack, now that you've put a man on the moon, why don't you do something about traffic?" And he came up with a solution of people working from home, and it was called the telecommunications transportation trade-off. And that didn't roll off the tongue very well. So it got shortened to telework and telecommuting. But over the years, it's just, if I had a nickel for everyone that every time I've heard somebody want to change this name or brand this name or whatever, I'd be wealthy. So it's really about flexibility, and I'll be happy when we don't actually have to call it something. This is just the way people
Work.
work.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree. That's why I think we're all referring to it as a future of work. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I think just on a small note, I wanted to share, especially because it was related to the commute part. That's how sort of it got invented. Our one of our core products is Office Commute Solution, which is used by around 300,000 employees. And I think as per the statistics of the travel time of an average employee commuting to work in India, an average employee spends 7% of his or her life commuting to work. So that's a
Wow.
significant portion of a person's life which goes into commuting to work. So obviously, as you sort of pointed it out, that it does kind of help you save that time, at least for some days of the week, for sure.
Yeah, exactly. Here in the US, it's 11 days a year. A half-time telecommuter saves the equivalent of 11 work days a year.
Now, I can
Excellent.
certainly understand that. I think for the audience, just some housekeeping announcements. While Kate and I are discussing, it would be good if you have any questions or thoughts, you could post it on the chat, and I think either towards the end of the call or during our webinar, I'm going to pick it up. So with that, Kate, let's jump right into the discussion. You're obviously a globally renowned leader in this space, and in particular about this discussion. I'd like to focus on your advocacy for the remote and hybrid work. which, as you said, dates back probably around 5 decades. Now that it looks that it is destined to be substantially more in the future than what it was in the past, how do you think what the reality is right now, and how does it mesh with the expectations?
Yeah, good question. The my biggest concern right now is that a lot of organizations feel like, well, we did remote, so this hybrid thing is going to be easy. Companies in all of the surveys over the last couple of years have been surprised at how well and how easily they made that transition. But prior to the pandemic, we would have spent 6 months to a year working with a large company to get them ready for this transition. And the things that we would have done in that time haven't been done by many companies. So we've kind of been in, I think we've been in triage mode for the last 2.5 years. We always thought we were going to go back, going to go back, going to go back. So we really didn't put the infrastructure in place that's needed to optimize remote work. And my fear is that companies, at the worst, will say, "Oh boy, this isn't working. Let's stop. Let's go back to the old way," or the just won't realize the potential of the benefits that they could if they were doing it with more intention.
Sure. I think you mentioned, do you, are you saying that the companies, even in the last 2.5 years, have not everybody scaled up the infrastructure for remote work, even as of now?
They have for remote work, but not hybrid. And hybrid is going to be a great deal harder.
Oh,
So I equate it to when we got cell phones. Imagine when we got cell phones, we only used them at the house. Or when
yeah.
we got smartphones, we only used them to make phone calls. It's kind of what we've been doing. We haven't changed the practices and the processes to optimize remote work. So, I mean, things that we're going to have to deal with going forward, things like equity. How do you ensure that we don't create a second-class citizen of the remote worker? How do we make sure that they get the same promotions, that they get the same compensation increases? That needs to be thought through in meetings. There are many things that we found in the pandemic actually improved, and one of them was equity in meetings, because everybody was on the same size square on the screen. It took away that sense of we versus them. I mean, before the pandemic, being on a call and you're the only person that's remote, everybody else walks off for their donuts and you're left sitting there, or they have these little side conversations. So when we were all remote and all using Zoom or whatever, it equalized. Now we're going to go back to having a conference room that has some people and have some people that are coming in virtually. Some companies have made the technology changes to accommodate, for example, putting in video cameras that there's one called OWL that swivels its head so that it faces the person that's speaking, so I can tell who's talking. The microphone goes to that person so that the sound is good quality rather than this big muffled screen. Putting in multiple monitors so that you can see the people as well as hear them. See the presentation, but also see the people and get that sense of personality and all that goes with it, that other dimension.
No, absolutely. And in fact, just as a quick thing, I think and I totally agree that homogeneous is easy. When we were all in the office, it's easy. When we were 100% remote, that's the easy part. But when it's hybrid, some in the office, some not in the office, the biggest complaint is that the guys who show up at the office, half their team members are remote. It becomes difficult, especially in the meetings. If the equipment, as you said, is not rightly used or positioned, I think the guys who are remote will miss the donuts or maybe some interesting conversations. I actually found one question interesting, and so I'm going to just ask it right away from Francina Gill. Actually, before this question, Kate, what is the return to office sort of statistics around different areas in the US or different sectors in the US?
Yeah, good question, and it's different all over the world. I'm probably primarily U.S. Centric, but I do research the practice all over the world. Um, Before the pandemic, about 80% of the workforce said they wanted to work from home at least part of the time. Before the pandemic, that's like the last 10 years. All the studies showed the same thing. During and after the pandemic, about 80% of people say they like to work from home, and they'd like to do it about half of the time, which prior to the pandemic was the norm for those who worked from home. So before the pandemic, we had less than 5% working from home half time or more. And during the pandemic, depending on which number you believe, somewhere between 50 to 60% of the workforce working from home. Employees now want to continue to work from home about 2 days a week, 3 to 4 days a week, 5 days a week in the case of some, and employers want them to be in the office 3 to 5 days a week, and that's the struggle. It's come together some. I mean, certainly this has turned the heads of many organizations. Prior to the pandemic, the Society for Human Resource Management said that about 7% of employers offered remote work or hybrid work to all or most of their employees. Now it's 70%.
Nice.
So I mean, that's a huge shift.
10x,
But
yeah.
but there are so many nuances, in how they're doing hybrid. Only about 12% of organizations are sort of allowing the employee to make all of the decisions, pulling it down to the employee level. Some are using a forced flexibility. You'll come in on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I don't think that's going to work because I don't know about you, but I rarely start my day and do the things that I planned to do that day.
Yeah, yeah.
Something else always gets in the way. So what, we're only going to come together on Tuesdays to collaborate? It's
Won't
just
work.
not
Yeah.
going to work, right? So, differences in who decides. Sometimes it's leadership that's making the decision of who can and how and where and all those kinds of things. I think it has to be down at the team level because, as we look at the statistics you've asked, all over the U.S., about 43% of the workforce the office occupancy is at about 43% of what it was prior to the pandemic. 43%. And that's held pretty much steady since about February. By the way, we're almost up to 100% return to sporting events, restaurants,
Restaurant.
and other venues. So,
And
it isn't that they're afraid to go outside. But before the pandemic, occupancy studies all over the world showed that offices were only about half occupied. So if you take that 43% of
multiplied
that
by
50%, it leaves about 25%, which is why, some of these places look like a ghost town. And it's a real struggle for employers, sort of a chicken and egg. We've got to get enough people in that when people come in, there's a buzz. But how do we do that, and how do we mandate that? And these are all, we've never done this before. We've done pieces of it, but we've never done it at this scale before. And I think it's wrong for any organization to lay down a law.
law.
This is the way it's going to be, or whether it's all in office or all at home. And because this is all a pilot. We're all in this
Yeah.
big pilot phase of how it's going to work. We don't know if the people who say they want to work from home 3 days a week are actually going to. We don't know if the people who say they want to come to the office 5 days a week are actually going to. We've got to wait and see, and it's different for every industry. It's different within companies. Within I worked with a big law firm on their return to office strategy. The folks in Texas are coming back like crazy, but not in San Francisco, not
Yeah.
in New York. So it's very nuanced, and it's why we just can't follow Google. We just can't do what everybody else is doing. It has to be about our own DNA and our own culture.
No, absolutely, Kate. In fact, just to share some statistics which we collect from our usage of the platform. In India, obviously, this number is slightly higher. So we're like by the end of August, we are at 75% of the pre-pandemic number. So out of 100 people who were coming to the office, now 75 are coming 1 or more days in a week. But the number of days they're coming in the week are actually on average 2 in a week out of the 5 days. And in that also, as you had mentioned, that different sectors have a different ratio. So banks, and mostly because these are mandates, strong mandates from the banks, these numbers are more between 3 to 3.5 days in a week. But for the internet product companies, like I'm just taking the names like Google, Facebook, Amazon, I think these numbers are more around 1 to 1.5 days. So you're absolutely right that everybody is trying to sort of carve out their own policy. And what we've seen, because this return to office has been there for a few months, I would say, at least for 4 months, fairly active, people or companies are eventually leading it to the teams. So like a customer success team can decide their policy, which would be different from the sales team, which would be different from the tech team, which would be different from the accounting team. So sort of that's what looks to me. But as you rightly said, these are all big pilots which are going on, and you do not know what it might result into. So with that, I think, Kate, I've seen that you've worked a lot over a lot of research with tools like workplace savings and technology ROI calculators. How do you think that the facilities and the workplace team can leverage some of these tools, especially during these situations?
Yeah, I started out my career as a banker, so I tend to look at things on an ROI basis, and that's actually what got me interested in, or sold, I would say, on the potential for remote work. Um, 15 years ago, we put a calculator on our website that is free and organizations can use to quantify the people, planet, and profit impact potential in remote work. So you put in that I've got 25% of my workforce that's going to work from home. They're going to work from home an average of 2.5 days a week. And it'll crank out what the potential savings are in productivity, turnover, real estate, absenteeism, transit subsidies, and then take off the costs also. So there's costs to the employer. And what that works out to is that an employer with a half-time, people working from home half-time, saves about $11,000 per half-time remote worker per year. That's based on some very conservative assumptions. I've cataloged over 6,000 studies over the years, everything I could put my eyeballs on that has to do with not just remote work, but workplace strategy in general. And so all of that is documented. You can download a white paper with all of the footnotes that shows how those assumptions came about. So, I think that, look, we're driven by costs.
Yeah.
That's a reality, and as a recession is looming, or perhaps even here, it's going to become even more the focus. And the driver for remote work over the years it's been like this sort of pendulum. It's attraction and retention, it's productivity, it's saving money, it's the environment. And right now, we're probably over at the talent, attraction, and retention. There's no doubt in my mind that we would not be having these discussions were it not for the global talent shortages. We would just be back to the office. But the employees are in the driver's seat. And they've wanted this desperately all along, and now they're in a position to not just ask for it, but demand it. I don't know if you saw the news. 1,300 New York Times employees petitioned the New York Times about their return to work policy, return to office. I just said return to work. I hate that phrase.
Yeah, it's return to office. They were anyway working, you said, right? Yeah,
Return
absolutely.
to office. Yes, exactly. And they said, we're not coming back on your terms. And they just want autonomy. They want choice. And in fact, when people work is even more important to them than where they work.
Where they
So
work, yeah.
being able to shift time, to just think about a Saturday, right? You're looking forward to Saturday, but you've got things to do on a Saturday. You've probably got errands, you've probably got stuff around the house, but you still look forward to it because you're in control. You're the one making the decisions.
No, absolutely. I think just on that note, and you brought this in your previous conversation, if left to the employees, our data shows that the day they want to commute to the office, and probably it could also be a function of traffic, are actually Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays. Mondays and Fridays are, for whatever reason, if left to employees by their own choice, those are not the preferred days to be in the office.
Yeah, I won't name names, but early in the pandemic, some companies came out and insisted that their people that be in the office on Mondays and Fridays. It's sort of like the ultimate mistrust message that you send to your employees. And that's really what it's about. I mean, since Jack d- 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 developed the term and the concept 5 decades ago, the problem has always been managers just don't trust their employees to work untethered. And we've seen that ramp up during the pandemic. We've seen a 70% increase in employee tracking, employee monitoring,
Hmm.
uh,
Yeah,
which, it just gives me the creeps. I mean, if I thought somebody was tracking my keystrokes and looking at my face, I would just be paralyzed. And the research from psychologists and psychiatrists say, it's very harmful. And they've just proven, I think the reason that people are so angry about it is they've just proven we can do this.
yeah.
Companies, when they look at their productivity, when they look at their bottom line for the last couple of years, they've largely been successful. So, why now are you going to put these monitors in place? Um, we've known since the 50s that the best way to manage people is to give them goals, to give them the tools they need to meet those goals, and then get out of their way. Let them give them the autonomy to figure out how they want to work and get the job done. And if they don't, well, then you've got to have a conversation. But it's having those goals rather than just seeing
Yeah.
the back of somebody's head in an office chair and taking that as a proxy for productivity.
Yeah, no, absolutely, totally agree. And in fact, for that one, I think I'll take a note, and to our audience as a follow-up message, I will find the link. I'll check the link of that calculator which you just mentioned. Yeah, the ROI calculator, and if it is available, I'm assuming it is. I will.
Yeah,
I
it's
will.
Global Workplace Analytics / ROI.
Sure, I will. I will. We'll ensure that for the benefit of everybody, we send the link after our conversations. Now, with that, Kate, let's segue. I know there are a bunch of questions which have come up as well, but just wanted to get a quick thoughts on two more questions. What do you? We spoke about this whole concept of that hybrid is going to be more difficult than remote. Do you think that technology would play some piece in solving this puzzle?
I think it does, absolutely. And, I don't think that we would have been able to handle this rapid transition were it not for technology. I think it also accelerated the development of a lot of technology that we've needed for years. One of the things that I think organizations should consider is having kind of a remote first attitude, because everything that you would do to optimize on remote work will benefit the people and the company and the environment no matter where they work. And so some of the new tools and technologies are things that we should have been using all along. But the problem is you can't fix problems with technology.
Yeah.
Uh, a woman at the GSA, General Services Administration, some years ago, when the U.S. government was transitioning a large building to telework, and they put 4,000 people in a building designed for only 2,500 by using this flexible workplace strategy. And she said that telework doesn't create management problems; it reveals them. And I think that we've seen that in the pandemic. The pandemic didn't create management problems, business problems, it revealed them. It revealed that managers weren't trained to manage by results. It proved that we really didn't know where our people were working or how our people were working. That we had problems in meetings in terms of equity. That we we know we have diversity issues, and some of those are being solved by the new practices. But what I was going to say is you can't fix broken practices with technology,
Yeah.
and that you've got to look back at all of those processes and all of those practices and say, is the practice right? It's like the water cooler conversation. Everybody says
Yeah.
we ought to replicate the water cooler. Who said that that was a good thing, a good way to collaborate to begin with? We need to use technology in a way that improves how we work and our working lives and all of that. Um, and so, yes, technology has very much helped. I think it has a long way to go, to be honest. We saw Zoom
Yeah.
evolve during the pandemic. We're now starting to see holograms pick up. We're seeing the metaverse potentially taking a role in the future of work, um, and some of the collaboration tools, which are just
Yeah.
so essential, still have a ways to go. It's not like writing on a whiteboard, and we need to fix some of those things.
So I must also admit here that as a designer of this workplace platform, I think we are just constantly learning when we are going with clients, right? What we thought was the problem statement versus how the employees used it. Some of them had inertia, some of those had problems versus what we thought they were coming to the office versus how they wanted. So I think totally acknowledge on that while technology can, you need to fix the processes and then ensure that technology works on those fixed processes to either automate those or probably bring transparency to the entire ecosystem.
Yeah, I mean, one of the big problems in terms of the return to office is who's going to be there. I only
Yeah,
want to go
who's going
in
to be
if
there? Yeah.
my good friend Tapish is going to be there, and then I want to know where he's sitting. Or maybe I want to know where somebody's sitting because I don't want to sit next to them.
Yeah.
But that just really stood out as organizations started to contemplate their return to offices. How do we know where people are going to be? How do you plan around those things? A lot of the companies, again, it was accelerated by the pandemic. The activity-based working and unassigned desks. A lot of organizations used this opportunity to make that move. It was already a trend. It was already happening prior to the pandemic, but it really accelerated it. And if you're going to do that, then you need to have a way to reserve those desks
Yeah.
and reserve those conference rooms. I mean, how many times do you see a conference room that's got for 12 that's got two people sitting
To
in it,
be. Yeah.
or a conference room that's reserved and there's nobody there?
Yeah.
Even worse. Uh, but even beyond that, we for so long we've just sort of created these workplaces and these workplace designs, and then never bothered to measure whether they're working. And so I think some of these technologies are allowing us to understand better what spaces people need, what spaces are
Mm.
going to be most active.
Yeah.
Why are they choosing those spaces? Is it because Debbie Downer, sits at this particular space, so they want to be away from her? Is the sun hitting this
Yeah.
space in a different way? Is this place warmer? In fact,
Yeah.
some companies are using, they're actually posting the warm zones, so that people know, oh, I'm always cold. I'll go to that place or that area. Air quality. I mean, that's something
Okay.
that's hugely important to people right now. Contact
No.
tracing, health monitoring. All of these things have been accelerated by the pandemic.
No, absolutely. So, Kate, what I'm going to do is that I do have a question or two, but I'm going to take a pause here because I see a lot of questions from the audience, and I certainly want to take those and help and get your answers on that. So, the first question is, what is your opinion on the big tech companies asking or forcing employees to return to office? So the person has used both, uh, Francica Gill, asking or forcing the big tech companies to return to office.
Yeah, I think there is a difference between asking and forcing, and sometimes asking from the perception of the employee feels like forcing. It's like, we really want you to come in 3 days a week. Well, are you really going to come in one day a week now that they've said that? You're going to be afraid. It's just not going over well. There are many, many examples of organizations that have sort of walked back what they
Hmm.
initially said during the pandemic, which is why I think there shouldn't be any, firm decisions. It's we're going to try this, we're going to pilot this, and helping your employees, your people understand why are we making these decisions. Capital One during the pandemic came out with the most eloquent return to office letter that I've ever seen. It was the CEO, and he explained, we want you to come back 2 days a week, and here's why. We're afraid of this, we're afraid of that, we think this, we think that, but we're going to be monitoring it, and we're going to learn from whatever we find. I think that the people are going to vote with their feet. The best and the brightest are not going to take those jobs, are going to leave those jobs. Those organizations are not going to be able to hire the best and the brightest from all over the world. I think of Silicon Valley as this little bubble of people
Mm.
that all, live and breathe and play within their own group. How reflective is that of what the people across the world needs in terms of products and services? And so the diversity of culture and the diversity of geography that allowing people to work remotely gives an organization is just huge. You know, I also think that organizations need to question their assumptions about why, right? We hear we'll lose productivity. Well, really?
Yeah.
Did you measure it? And how did you measure it? Um, innovation. Innovation is going to suffer. Harvard, Stanford, a number of other places have proven that innovation is a two-part process that requires both private time and group time. And so, hybrid is sort of the best of both there.
Yeah.
People aren't going to collaborate. Well, really, aren't they? Are you having a problem with that? Uh, the research says, who was it? Gartner just came out with research showing that, that there is no degradation in culture, that actually started to happen prior to the pandemic. And it's sort of one of those management problems that needs to be fixed, but it's not related to the pandemic. So I think we need to really keep asking why. Why do you want your people back? What is the thing that you're trying to fix? And is that real, or is that just your perception?
No, sure, sure. So I do see that. Yeah, I probably can't remember any company where I've come where they've said that you're going to be 5 days. So mostly companies have said that it's fairly flexible and hybrid, and that's what is moving. Good. So next question is by Shaila. Do you really believe, and I think this is sort of, I've heard a lot of people ask, do you really believe the hybrid mode will last? Some companies are already starting a back to office project, right? So maybe the second part of it you already touched, but I think the question is more fundamental. Will hybrid last, or it'll just be 100% back to office?
Yeah, I mean, I think the genie's out of the bottle. If the pandemic had gone on for 2 months or 3 months or 4 months, I would say that rubber band was going to spring right back, and we were all going to return to the office. But the longer it went on, the longer people started to realize, wow, this is really different. In my life, it's always been interesting that it's not until you stop doing something that you realize just how stressful it was. So, did I really travel 4 days a week? I mean, you do it. It's sort of like the frog in the boiling water. You just do it and you don't realize it. And I can't tell you how many people have said to me now, I can't believe I did that, and I'm not going to do it again. They've found different values in their life. They found that work is they want to earn a living, but they want to have a life, and they've proven that they can get their work done and have a life. So I think this is going to be a hard one to rewind. So
Yeah, sure. I think after the industrialization era of the 1800s, where we kind of made factories, where this whole concept of going to the factories, making sure that the factories and the assembly line runs 5 days or 7 days, I think this change is permanent. We're not going to go back to the concept of industrialization of 5 days a week. I totally believe that it's the rubber band has sort of either got stretched or broken.
Right, right.
Yeah, I think Addy has given a comment that loved the point on reducing the commuting, which it gets, fuel emissions, the environment. And I think while we were talking, I mentioned that while India has an average of 7%, you mentioned 11 days in a year, which is sort of 3.5% of the life in US, right? So we can sort of say that it's a significant amount of somebody's life which you are spending daily commuting to work. So surely there's a benefit.
Yeah, but one of the things that we saw in the pandemic, and I've always been one that advocated the environmental impact, and we saw within the first days of the pandemic that, man, the air got clearer, the roads got less congested, water got cleaned up, and all of those things. But then it turned out that 2021, at least in the U.S., vehicle miles traveled was the same or even higher than it was in 2019. And so if we really want to push the environmental button here, we've got to be intentional about how we use our cars, how we use our vehicles. The trip chaining, instead of going out and going to the store and then coming back and then going out and doing this and going out and doing that, we need to chain those trips together, which is something that we often did coming to and from the office. I will say also, though, while vehicle miles traveled went up, congestion went down, and congestion is a very polluting type of travel, as did air travel. I'm seeing companies struggle now with, are we really going to go back to the level of travel that we had before? We've proven that, I think, good enough is good enough. You and I have not met in person, but I feel close to you. I trust you, and I think that we'll see that those decisions will be made differently in the future, particularly as we come into a recession.
Yeah, sure. There's a question by Michael Shear. The question is, perhaps the first questions we should ask is, do we have the right kind of design? Do we have the right kind and design of infrastructure to support a distributed workforce?
Well, in the U.S., we certainly don't. We're very backward in most cities in terms of transit options. And this is even going to make that worse because as more people stay home, there's not enough money going to support transit. People are afraid of using transit because of the potential for getting sick. But I think what Michael's pointing to is a good one too. Do we need tall office buildings? Do we need a central place?
Yeah.
Couldn't we have a hub and spoke model?
Habit.
Do we all need to be in the same building? Is co-working a better model, or is it some blend of all these things? And that's basically what I'm seeing, is that companies are sort of approaching this as more of an ecosystem of places and spaces that will be the future of where people work. I don't think the office buildings are not going to go away. Actually, I did a back of the envelope estimate and projected that about 20%, we'll need about 20% less office space in total in the future in the US. About 20% of people will work from home full time. About 10 to 15% will work in the office full time, and the balance will be in that hybrid area.
So you're saying a combination of those will result into a 20% less workspace footprint.
Correct. And also based on who can, who wants to, who's allowed, a whole bunch of things went into the calculation.
Sure. In fact, on that, there's a question by Darth. What is the ROI of adopting a hot desking policy in an organization? What are the typical savings on the real estate costs of the same? I think you answered $11,000 a year, or just please correct me.
The real estate part of that is actually not the biggest part of it. The biggest part is the increase in productivity that's been shown as a result of not having the distractions and being able to in working remotely or in some place in co-working spaces or whatever. in that projection, I think it was about 2,500 of it is the real estate, and it assumes that for every half-time remote worker, we get to reduce 25% of their office space. So not all of it, it's not going to be a one for one, and it's going to happen slowly. Only about 30% of leases came up for renewal during the pandemic. So this is something that's going to play out over probably 5 to 7 years. As real estate comes up for renewal, companies will start to make those hard decisions about eliminating space. Some have already done it, probably because they knew they had too much space to begin with, as many did. Again, it just accelerated that. We're also seeing that there's a shift in the type of space, that organizations are moving from sort of a 30% collaborative space, 70% private space, assigned desk space, to almost the opposite.
Yeah.
And so we have to keep in mind that we're not going to eliminate a one for one. And the people impact is so much higher than the real estate potential savings. If people lose 10 minutes a day of
Yeah.
productivity because you stuck them in some open office and gave them a set of headphones, and they couldn't be productive, if they lose 10 minutes a day, it's the equivalent of their entire annual occupancy cost. So, we need to be very careful how we make those decisions. And I think one of the critical things is private space. People say that that's the number one thing that they want in coming back to the office. And I think one of the reasons people are so eager to stay at home is because we've made the offices so bloody horrible, right? They want privacy. They need to do heads down work. About 60% of our work is still heads down work. And I'm just worried that we make the shift too far toward the social and collaborative space and forget that you're not going to collaborate 100% of the time when you go back to the office, and that we're still going to need those private spaces.
No, sure. And let me ask you on that, because the way I was seeing the hybrid is evolving is when you need to do your heads down private work, that's the day you choose to work from home. And when you need to collaborate, you're going to be in the office. But are you saying that in the office also we should keep substantial private space?
I don't know if I would say substantial, but we certainly need a good bit. Take that 10 to 15% that's going to be there all the time. They need a heads down space. When you go on a business trip, you're not in meetings all day long. You
Yeah.
probably are sneaking into a conference room for 12 people and getting ready for that next meeting or whatever it is. So we are still going to need those spaces.
No, sure, sure. There's one interesting question. It says some people in the US fear that if the companies go fully remote, they will take that opportunity to hire candidates from overseas at a fraction of the cost. What are your thoughts on this?
I think there'll be a flight to quality. One of the big questions a lot of employees are asking and employers are thinking about is, do we reduce salaries if somebody moves, say, out of San Francisco and moves to a much less expensive place? Can they take their $400,000 salary and go live in a cheaper space and bank the savings? Early in the pandemic, there were a lot saying that they probably would reduce. They already do. I mean, when they hire somebody in a certain geography, there's a chart that tells them, what the wage is in that area. Now I'm seeing them go to kind of a universal wage. So you're paid for the work. And I think it has to shake out to that because of this whole issue of equity. The way we were working before and the poverty in some nations, it's just not sustainable. So I think there may be a brief flight, as we saw in a lot of the contact centers that went offshore maybe a decade ago, and a lot of them came back. But I think
So yeah,
cultural blend is better. You know, we're better when we've got an integration of cultures.
No, sure, sure. So yeah, maybe there's going to be at some point a stable state which is going to come. Uh, Kate, we are at the top of the hour. Just this last question, which I want to ask you, is that what do you think hybrid is going to be in short term, which is like 1 year, and what do you think hybrid might look like in long term, which is 5 year plus?
Yeah. I think we're going to stick at that in the US. We're going to stick at that average of 40, 45% occupied. Um, I think it might go to 50%. I think that there's certainly going to be a honeymoon period where you go back and you see your colleagues and this is great. And then you've had enough of them. And so, you know, I think that there will be that shakeout. So I honestly think that we'll have about 45% of the workforce working from home multiple days a week by the end of 2023. And 5 years out, I think we'll be looking at, I mean, if only 60% of the workforce is able to work from home, you know, I think we'll look at that filling out, but probably not, we're not going to see 60%. Some people just don't want to. I also think that the dynamics of work are going to change so much in 5 years
Yeah.
that this will be a moot conversation.
Sure, sure. No, thank you so much, Kate. I know there are a few more questions. What I'm going to do, guys, is that I see a lot of questions around the savings calculator, which Kate spoke about. I'm going to take some notes on where they are, put the URL there in the response. The Work and Sync team is going to do that so that you can benefit from some of those, and certainly you can find those. If you still need something, you can write back to us and we'll figure out a way to help you on that. Thank you so much, Kate. I certainly enjoyed and learned a lot of things during this conversation. Thank you so much.
Great to talk to you. Bye-bye.